Hello everyone. In this video, we'll be exploring one of Pretend's latest features, transitions. Now, I just created a project and imported a script. You can see the different scenes or story groups here in my library and timeline. Each of these story groups represents a scene in my screenplay. We've already gone through story groups in another video tutorial, which I'll be sure to include in this video's description. I'm going to double click inside one of these scenes to go in its timeline. Note that you can also use these breadcrumbs right here to navigate through your different story groups. And now I'm going to select and drag a couple clips from my media bin and drop them on the first track in my timeline. I'll zoom out using the minus key, make sure you have the inside of the timeline selected for that shortcut to work. And now I can clearly see the cut point between my two clips. If you play through the cut point, you'll see in the viewer that we go from the last frame of the first clip to the first frame of the second clip. That's where my cut is. But now in Pretend, you can add a transition like a cross dissolve, which is the default, by double-clicking on this white bar that appears when you hover over the cut point. You'll then see this dialog box appear that pretty much tells you that your clips are too short. This just means that the transitions require extra frames outside of the clip containers. By clicking on Continue, Pretend will just shave off a few frames and add the transition for you. I'll undo to remove the transition and show you that you can trim the clips yourself and add some extra frames outside of the clip containers, which are what we call clip handles. Now that that's done, double click again on the white bar and you will see that the dialog box doesn't appear, and that's because we've trimmed the clips ourselves. Now you can delete a transition by clicking on its clip or container and hitting delete. You can single click or click and hold for a pop-up menu of the main transitions available in Pretend, like a dip to color, which will fade from one clip to a color, then back to the second clip. Right now that color is black, but we'll change that in just a second. You can change the transition type from the transition clip. You can modify the length of your transition using the corner handles. Bottom ones work independently from one another, and the top ones work symmetrically. If you want a longer transition, but the clip won't let you drag it out, that just means you need to trim more of your video clips. I'll just use these editing tools to shave off a few more frames, and now your transition allows for a longer duration. With your transition clip, you can also modify the cut point between two clips by dragging the bottom handle left or right. Note that if you change the cut point between two clips and delete the transition, the cut point will remain as you changed it. You can lock the transition into place and disable any further modifications using this little lock icon right here. And you can also turn off the transition using this power button, which will simply display the cut as if you had not added a transition. Now, perhaps you've noticed that when selecting a transition, the transition settings appear in our inspector panel. It's here that you can further modify each of your transitions. You can rename any transition, change the length and duration. You have the same options to turn off a transition or even to lock it. And you can, of course, change the transition type. Now, what's specifically great about Pretend are these next three settings here: speed, ease curve, and fade color. Speed modifies the transition's rate of change, how fast or how slowly it fades, really. You can see that as I change this setting, the curve inside the transition clip changes as well. And you can further modify the curve by changing this setting below, ease curve. Just position your mouse below the box, click, hold, and drag left or right to activate the slider. You can see the shape of the curve change inside the transition as well. And here's a tip: you can change your slider speed by clicking on these rings. The more rings turn blue, the faster your slider works. The last one is fade color, which simply lets you choose which color your transition will be fading to and from. Click on the box, open your color panel, and pick any color you want, and you're done. And here's another tip: if you don't want to fade from a color, but instead want to fade from the clip's opacity, just uncheck the fade color box, and now your transition will reveal whatever is on the track below. This can be convenient for titles or if you want to briefly show something else. And now that we've gone through how to use and modify transitions, you're ready to make use of them in Pretend.